Hello everybody. I've done a few videos now on kind of, dark subjects, shame, guilt, owning your dark side. And the thing is, it's not really about that. So I thought I would do a video to explain the reasons why I've been going on about those, because actually there's a whole level behind it, which is the reason for doing it. The only reason that it's kind of easier to talk about guilt and shame and your dark side because we notice that more, right? I could equally have made the videos about the reasons that we find joy and happiness or significance in certain issues, right? It's equally a construct as is the guilt and shame. My message effectively is kind of question, are you sure? Where did that come from? Is it even yours? And you could say that about all of the good subjects just as much as you could about the ones which are uncomfortable. It's just that because they're good, we kind of let them go. They just kind of fade off into the distance because it seems perfectly okay. Whereas the ones which are uncomfortable, we don't like those. So that was why it's kind of easier to talk about the uncomfortable ones. But the premise for either or for neither is that they are a result of a misinterpretation inside our brain. And so what this video is going to do is get inside at least what I think is going on at a layer behind. Okay? Everybody seems to identify with parts. Okay? It's one of those things which we seem to grow up with, we intrinsically grasp. I don't know if they are a metaphor. We can tell. Clinical studies show from a very, very early age, from like 2 years old, infants are already playing out the roles of various parts inside of themselves. So it seems an intrinsically human and relatable aspect to ourselves. And so you can probably get that bit anyway, but typically what people tend to do is they tend to identify with their parts as if their parts are them. Okay. And I wonder if you'd walk down a slightly different avenue with me and just see where this goes. Okay. Imagine that the parts were all pure. You have a part of you that just wants to play. You have a part of you, let's go back to real infancy. You have a part of you which wants to please your mum or your dad. There's a part of you that wants to learn, part of you that wants to explore and discover, part of you that wants to make friends and be social, right? All these parts that are just there, right? They're just part of our experience of what it is to be us. And over time, either through our own personal experience or through the messages that received from our family or the messages that we receive from culture, from society, from governments, from countries, as we grow up, we discover what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what is permissible, what is not permissible. Especially when it comes to experiences where we find ourselves in an uncomfortable situation, we maladapt those parts, okay? Or rather, they maladapt, yeah? Although we are them. So, let's take your playful part as a simple example, okay? So your playful part just loves to play. You have great fun when you're playing, okay? You learn a lot, you discover a lot, you're very creative. You can come up with new ideas when you're playing. You discover things about yourself that you didn't realize you were capable of. And it's all such fun, okay? And then one day, let's make up some ridiculous hypothetical situation. One day at the age of 17, you're playing in the sandpit and all of your teenage friends look at you and laugh because you're supposed to grow up, yeah? Or in your professional life, it's no longer permissible to be playful. You have to be serious and professional. I'm in Switzerland, you know, if I'm too playful here, I would anticipate already that I'll have sort of questioning, judgmental looks from people around, because it's not the done thing culturally. So what happens is that playful part of me has learned a message that somehow it's not permissible in all environments. And so depending upon how awkward or embarrassing that experience was, that playful part of me might run straight off into exile, okay? Or what is more interesting is that it might just kind of get damped down. It might either damp itself down, or it might enlist some of the other parts, or some of the other parts may choose to dampen it down. Your professional part, for example. Don't you play anymore. You know, we're supposed to look respectable. And so the professional part starts to lean on the playful part, restrict it, right? Like a manager, right? So suddenly we have parts inside of us that are wanting to do good, but that each kind of take on a position of responsibility. They take on a personality of themselves based upon an experience which has led them to come to the conclusion that the way for me, you, to survive, to get on well, is to limit certain parts of you. Yeah? So then they carry on doing that. Okay? Then from time to time, despite the fact that these managers are there trying to limit these other parts of you, the unruly parts, which could potentially put you at risk of embarrassment or ridicule or whatever it may be, from time to time they don't do a good enough job, you fail to anticipate, then what happens is you develop another layer of part that was kind of also there along, much more of a sort of an extreme polarized firefighting example, which is like, oh, we've got to act right now, okay? There's no ability to manage, we have to act, right? So these three types of potential maladaptation: being sent into exile, leaning on other parts through a sort of a managerial perspective, or firefighting in a panicked reaction when something needs to be done immediately. They're all running around inside your head. The older you get, the more developed they become, and the more they feel like you, right? So we kind of speak from our parts. We're normally pretty aware of the firefighting parts of us, okay? That's when something happens and we go, oh my God, and we very rapidly try and stamp it down. We're reasonably assured of the exiles as well, the parts of us which are so forbidden that they've just kind of sent them far, far away so that nobody will see them. The managers, it's a bit more complicated. You might be aware of the managers, but you might not, you know, because some of them, they can be really, really subtle. But the point is, the managers don't really want to be managers. The firefighters don't really want to be firefighters. The exiles certainly don't want to be exiles. Here's the rub. Okay, this is why I went into the whole idea of guilt and shame and owning your dark side. Okay, because it's not about them in itself. It's about this idea that you are identifying with them as if they were you, as if they are you. When you can cut yourself some slack, when you can question the reality of whether or not you are truly shameful, or whether this activity was truly something to be guilty about, or whether these certain aspects of your psychology need to be hidden away, otherwise you're going to be, you know, ridiculed or whatever it may be. When you can take a step back and look at that and recognize the folly in the story, you start to observe these parts of you. Okay, you start to observe the conflicts that are going on. It's like a multitude of people in a city. But the interesting thing is that they are all at different levels of personal development, depending upon when they got stunted, depending upon when the learning action was that created this maladaption. So some will be really young. Some will still be doing a job that they really needed to do when you were 6 years old, right? Others maybe you learned in your teen years. Others when you were at work. You know, they all come up whenever they come up, either from, as I say, a personal learning or a cultural learning or a familial situation. When you can take a step away from that and start to observe, it's like observing warring factions, okay, some of whom will be particularly polarized because they are very, very adept at doing their job. Some will be dominant, some will be quieter. But when you can observe that, you can start to question what you are, okay? And the punchline is, that bit is you. That bit is the self. So by questioning, rather than feel like a few of those parts, rather than self-identifying with a few of those parts, by taking a step back and observing, you're giving yourself what's called agency, okay? You're giving yourself power to decide, to choose, to be the ruler over your organism, okay? So I've spent a lot of videos talking about how it's very important to get inside your body. And interestingly, this is one where you start to find a balance between head and heart, between all of these differing aspects of your personality, which come up in accumulation to make your sense of identity, but which are all created at certain junctions in your life, and you have a choice as to what to do with them. Just by noticing that, the burdens by which these parts are maladaptive start to lift. Because you're bathing them in a sense of kindness, okay? You are observing them in a non-judgment way because they're part of you, and permitting them all to breathe, permitting them all to express themselves and to be heard. And you can start to speak for them rather than as them, okay? It's very important. So they feel understood. Imagine that there's a whole multitude, there's a whole family of people inside of you. Some of them are really young, some of them are really sensitive, some of them are old. They've all got their skills, they're all really good at certain things, but they've all, because of these maladaptions, they've set upon a role for themselves which they are now carrying out robotically. And by observing them, you are giving permission to those parts to unburden the reason behind them getting stuck. And so therefore permitting them to restart their journey of personal development. You end up back at all the world's a stage, right? That everything is a learned interpretation stroke misinterpretation. And there were much more than we think we are. It's just another way of getting there. But it's tremendously healing to do this, because you discover your, I mean, I use that word, agency, your personal power. You discover your ability, a bit like the king or queen of a society, okay? Every family needs a decision maker. Every government needs a leader. Every country needs a leader. Every system works better when there is a decision maker. When you start to observe these positions, and can speak for them rather than as them, you are assuming that role of responsibility, the sovereign. You are creating the sense of agency inside of yourself. So suddenly everything is a choice. And that's incredibly rewarding and incredibly relieving. So to go back to my original point, okay, it's easier to find the inroads into this through your pain points. Therefore, it's easier to consider it with shame, guilt, dark side, things that you're doing to access addictions, trigger points, times in your life where someone brings something up in a conversation and you go, I don't want to go there. Any of that, you know, because they're easy to notice, because they're uncomfortable. But every single one of your emotional responses, which is unexpected, is an entry point into questioning yourself as to what is going on between parts of your body and what is the meaning that you attach behind that part. What is that part trying to do for you? How old is that part? When did they learn what they're doing? Is it still relevant? But by bathing it in permissive observance, these things come out. Then you can deal with them. Yeah? So the end result is you become your best friend. Chew on it. Think about it. Yeah? It's a funny thing how we kind of self-identify with our parts, and the moment that we take a step back from them and observe them, wow, you give yourself a lot of freedom. I hope that's interesting. Yeah? I wish we could do the same thing on the great positive aspects of life. But it's just that we don't notice them to the same extent. You know, we might be grateful about them for a few seconds, but they tend to pass off because they're just good. It's the ones that we've labeled, which is all part of culture, right? But the ones that we've labeled as bad or morally unsound or uncomfortable, they're the ones that stick, and so we end up having to dig into that. All right, I hope that's interesting. If it is, let me know. Yeah, I really need feedback. That's the only way that I know when I'm on track and off track with these things. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see if I can dig a little more into some of these existential issues. All right, take care. Bye.